Welcome to the Relatively Damaged podcast by damaged parents, where crushed, distorted, splintered people come to learn maybe, just maybe, we're all a little bit damaged. Someone once told me it's safe to assume 50% of the people I meet are struggling and feel wounded in some way. I would venture to say it's closer to 100%. Every one of us is either currently struggling or has struggled with something that made us feel less than, like we aren't good enough, we aren't capable, we are relatively damaged, and that's what we're here to talk about. In my ongoing investigation of the damaged self, I want to better understand how others view their own challenges. Maybe it's not so much about the damage. Maybe it's about our perception and how we deal with it. There's a deep commitment to becoming who we are meant to be. How do you do that? How do you find balance after a damaging experience? My hero is the damaged person, the one who faces seemingly insurmountable odds to come out on the other side whole. Those who stare directly into the face of adversity with unyielding persistence to discover their purpose. These are the people who inspire me to be more fully me, not in spite of my trials, but because of them. Let's hear from another hero. Today's topic includes sensitive material which may not be appropriate for children. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as advice. The opinions expressed here were strictly those of the person who gave them. Today we're going to talk with Nicole Yeates. She has many roles in her life: daughter, survivor of a devastating motorcycle accident that caused a traumatic brain injury, rehabilitation counselor, best-selling author, and more. We'll talk about how she died on the road, her mom believed in her ability to come back from a vegetative state, how she healed and believes her purpose is to give hope to as many people as she can so they may find their purpose. Let's talk. Welcome, Nicole, to the Relatively Damaged podcast. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Angela.
You're welcome. So we're here today to talk about struggles and overcoming them. You answered an ad and you said you had a struggle to share. And my understanding is that you had a traumatic brain injury, which has left you with some significant disabilities.
Yeah, well, they're permanent disabilities, certainly. Basically, when I was 16 years old, I had a motorcycle accident. It was in New Zealand, and in New Zealand at that time, you were able to get your license at age 15, which is crazy, but it's not that anymore, it's 18. But I got my first tax return at 15, and it wasn't enough to buy a car, so I bought a motorbike. And lasted about 6 months before having a hit and run motorcycle accident. The guy left me on the road for dead. I died on the road, but was resuscitated. Died another 2 times after that in hospital. And my prognosis was expect death or life in a vegetative state.
Wow. I bet your family and friends were terrified.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Especially my mother. It's just mum and I. Basically, my father died when I was quite young. So basically, mum and I were it. So that was obviously very traumatic for her. Mm-hmm. I remained in a coma for another 3 weeks. And, it was touch and go for a lot of that. And when I woke up, I couldn't walk, talk. My body was so damaged, my brain was so damaged that it couldn't even regulate its own temperature. I had no awareness of bladder control. Basically, really, truly had to start from ground zero to relearn everything.
So you couldn't walk, you couldn't talk, you couldn't control your bladder. And what was the awareness like, though, when you woke up? What was that like?
Yeah, I wish I could answer that with clarity, Angela, but I have amnesia around about the year or two before the accident and the year or two after the accident are pretty hazy. I have complete blanks. Like apparently a year after the accident, I went to see a Dire Straits concert and had a marvelous time. I have no memory of it.
Okay, so was there some point where you realized that you didn't know and now you were starting to remember?
Look, I remembered people, like,
Mm-hmm.
I knew who my mother was, I knew who my friends were. Sometimes if I hadn't seen someone for a long time, I might get a little bit mixed up, but
Right.
I knew those basics. I just didn't know. I didn't know my way around. Like when I got out of hospital,
Uh-huh.
going home for the first time, I looked in my wardrobe and asked Mum whose clothes they were.
Mm.
I didn't know my way around the city I grew up in. Though I didn't know from a brain injury perspective, I didn't know social cues. I had to relearn social cues.
Social cues like what?
Well, when you're talking to someone and they zone out because they're totally not interested in what you're saying,
Right.
I would not understand those sorts of social cues. My frontal lobe damage meant my filter had been removed. So I just said whatever came into my head, which could be embarrassing or rude, and I would have no idea that it was like that.
Oh, okay. So kind of like the autistic person Okay, yeah. I'm trying, just want to understand.
Like a 3-year-old, basically.
Okay.
A 3-year-old has no idea about those sorts of intricacies of communication. And so really, I mean, it was going back to a toddler. I had to learn to be toilet trained again. I had to basically start from about there.
Now, I want to dial into the feelings, and what I'm trying to get at is it is a point blank question, I guess, did you feel embarrassed? Did you have enough awareness to feel embarrassed? Or do you see where I'm going?
Yeah, no, I didn't. And I relied heavily on feedback. So Mum, especially, she afterwards go, "Oh, Nicole, really?"
Okay, so she would tell you if something wasn't socially acceptable, and then you could make adjustments from there. And
that's it. Yeah. And then when I went back to school, because I had my accident on the 19th of June, 1987. So I missed all of the rest of that year of school and started back in 1988, so February 1988. So getting back into, I guess, a social environment that school is, I learnt things mostly by trial and error, mostly trial.
Oh, no. Do you have a story you want to share with us that you remember?
Oh, look, it would be things like if someone had come to school and let's say they had a pimple on their face and they'd gone to a lot of trouble to cover that pimple up so that they look nice for school. I would be the one to point it out.
And then what would happen?
And then I would see that the person was really embarrassed or felt really uncomfortable or, so I guess I learnt along the way.
Oh, no. So do you think that, I mean, most of them probably knew you had the accident and that you were coming back, right? Or no?
Well, yes. Look, my friends, when I was in hospital, my friends were amazing. They visited me, they participated in, doing things like recording how I was when they visited, whether I was awake or asleep, and being a part of doing the exercises to keep my limbs going. But then when I got out of hospital and the realization of my disabilities, I walked with a limp. I couldn't drive anymore. I didn't know my way around the city. I was a responsibility. Gone was the free-going teenager who challenged all boundaries. I couldn't do that anymore. So that was a really hard adjustment. That was probably the hardest part of everything for me. There was the going back to the altered reality where I had to learn to adjust to these disability issues. I couldn't remember anything. My short-term memory was atrocious. The amount of times I turned up to school and forgot tampons, when I had my period, I had to go to the office and ask for them. It could be embarrassing, those memory issues, but also from a learning perspective, I found, whereas before I was an average student, but I didn't have to try hard at all. I never studied. I just cruised through school, really, whereas I couldn't do that anymore. And my friends didn't cope with that. Well, most of them, I should say. Majority of them didn't cope with that, and they distanced themselves from me. I didn't understand it at the time. I was a teenager. They were teenagers.
Yeah.
And that actually sent me into a really deep depression. I became suicidal. I began to wish I hadn't lived in that.
So you felt super alone.
Yeah, I really did.
And these people that you thought you were going to be able to depend on couldn't be there for you in the way that you needed them to be there for you.
Yeah. They did. I'm sure they didn't understand it either. Ironically, many years later, many of us have become friends again. I'm no longer that dependent teenager.
Yeah, I think being a teenager is so hard, and I couldn't imagine having that happen in the midst of the teenage years, because not only are you struggling, but all your friends are struggling around you to even figure out who they are. And now you needed a little more support, and they're still trying to figure out who they are. So it makes sense to me that it would be really hard to not lose them, because they don't even know who they are or what they stand for or what their values are. Is that kind of...
Absolutely. And I'd changed too. I'd gone from a shy kind of, I was the sort of teenager that if I went to a party, I'd only stick with the group of friends I knew, because I wasn't confident enough to sort of go beyond that. So I went from that sort of person through to a person with no filter that was really loud and inappropriate. And so it was a difficult time for us all.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So now you're a rehabilitation counselor and a best-selling author. So traveling from having the traumatic brain injury to that sounds like a pretty amazing journey. And how did you do that?
Okay, well, there's lots of variants to that answer, Angela. I had a great support team in my mother. She never stopped believing in me, even when the doctors recommended turning life support off because I was going to be in a vegetative state if I lived. Her response was, "You don't know my daughter." She was the biggest support that I had. But I also had a great allied health team. So when my mother found my suicidal poetry, she went to the GP. They sent me to a psychologist, and he literally saved my life.
How so? When someone is in that place of suicide or wanting, or even suicidal ideation, right? And you went to this you said psychologist, right?
Psychologist, yeah.
Yeah. And how did and you attribute that to him helping save your life. How did that work? I mean, did he help you think? What about that helped you?
Okay, now that it's my book, Holding On to Hope, that's literally what Richard Wheeler did. He gave me hope. So I was hearing, amongst all of the adjustment to disability, rejection from friends, learning everything all over again, there was also this sense of helplessness and the feedback from doctors: you can't, you won't, you'll never, all these negatives. All of those factors collided. And I was also on epilepsy medication because I developed epilepsy from the accident. And basically, when I went to Richard, he was using quite progressive techniques at the time, which are well utilized now, things like meditation and visualization. So I would visualize my brain as a bunch of spaghetti or string or worms or whatever was the flavor of the day for me. And, and I'd imagine them in this mangled mess and put it together in an orderly fashion. And that was my visualization sort of technique, which I would do at home as well to try and heal my brain. He gave me tools that I could use that were easy to use. I wanted to be a psychologist before my accident, and, I still had that desire, because when the doctor said you can't, you won't, you'll never, that was for me like a red flag to a bull. I'm going to prove you wrong. I ain't believing none of that.
Which is actually really surprising, because a lot of people, when they become disabled, I mean, there's that sheer devastation and depression and, like you were saying, that hopelessness. So it's interesting that for you, like that no, you can't do this, to you is like, want to bet?
Yeah, it was a passionate driver for years, Angela, for years. And I hadn't actually realized how much I'd been holding on to that. And I guess the anger about those sorts of diagnoses that I held on to for a lot of years.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was a driver, which was great. But I actually sent the neurosurgeon who gave some of those negative prognosis a copy of my university transcript. And, it was a nice letter saying, thank you for saving my life, and thank you, for your care of me. But, my request is that when you're making these prognosis, don't just base it on anatomy and physiology, because there's lots of other factors. There's your internal beliefs, your personality, your support systems. There's lots of drivers that contribute to that outcome, not just anatomy and physiology. And he did respond to that letter, and nicely, and when I got that letter back from him, it was like the anger left my shoulders. It was quite amazing. But going back to the psychology, and my psychologist didn't say, no, you can't do psychology, or you couldn't. He gave me an IQ test.
Okay.
And he said, look, Nicole, it's not going to be easy. It's not impossible. Mm-hmm. You'll have to work really hard, but you could do it.
Right.
That was hope.
Yeah.
That's why, holding on to hope.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of, it's just so easy to lose hope and then find yourself in that hopelessness and even learned helplessness, if you will. I think it's so important to give hope. And absolutely. How is that best done, right?
Yeah. You don't want to set people up for failure. And I get that it's a tricky balance, and, doctors don't have an easy job, but there is a balance. Mm-hmm. And it took me 15 years to get the confidence to go to university. But, I did what I thought I could. Yeah. And, that was to start off with beauty therapy. I trained as a beauty therapist when I was 20.
What's a beauty therapist?
Beauty therapist is, when you go into a salon for facials and waxing and
okay.
I don't know what you call them over there, but
in the US it's estheticians. So they do the face waxing. Yeah. Then we have the hairstylist that cuts, for the hair, and I'm not sure if there's anything else. I think the esthetician do the big long eyelashes now too.
Yeah, that's right. And pedicures and manicures and all of that.
Yep.
So I trained as a beauty therapist, and I had to work really hard to retain all that information in my memory to pass the course. And in going back a bit, in my last year of high school, I actually did a psychology course at night school.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an introduction to psychology. It was just to sort of see if I'd like it and test the water a little bit. And I learnt memory strategies in that course that I use still. And that was kind of, I guess, that course and having that knowledge or that education was about me going from all these bits of paper everywhere to remind me of things to actually using my brain as a memory strategy
So this was in a psychology course, and
Hmm.
then and was it part teaching that, or was it because you took that course, you were challenged to figure out how to do that?
Well, I learnt about memory, I learnt about the difference between short-term memory and long-term memory and working memory and those sorts of things. But then there was scientific evidence about, how much short-term memory can actually hold in the average person, and ways to actually make sure to and attempt these strategies actually to enable the short-term memory to hold more information. So the strategies were about that sort of thing and enabling the short-term memory to hold more information. So I basically took that learning and applied it to my real life. And
Wow.
so used those strategies in my everyday life. And now they're just a part of my normal routine. I'm probably the most organized person you'll ever meet because that's how it needs to be. 33 years later, my short-term memory is still crap.
Right. No, I totally understand that. For me, organization is an absolute must have, and it has to be easy.
Yeah. Well, now I'm running an occupational health business. So I'm a rehabilitation counsellor. I work in the occupational rehabilitation space. So people who've been injured at work, whether that be physical or psychological injuries.
Hmm.
I've written a book. So I'm also branching out a little bit with specialising in brain injury rehab.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of things, a lot of elements in that. So I can't rely on my short-term memory to do everything I need to in that space. So that's why it's so important to have strategies around memory. And that's something that I teach in my workshops. I do webinars, online webinars. I'm also in the process of just about launching a brand new memory management tool called Rethink. It's an
Rethink.
app, Rethink. So that Rethink is a combination of rethink and tinkering. When you tinker with something, you're modifying it, improving it, and rethinking, because after a brain injury, you do have to rethink everything.
Yeah. I think with any injury, if it's debilitated you, it's on any level, you have to
Absolutely. Yes,
rethink
correct.
everything.
Yep, for sure. So Rethink is specifically designed for people with memory issues.
Okay.
And it's an organizational tool, for appointments and tasks. It has inbuilt reminders in it, so you don't even have to set reminders. It just does it.
Oh, wow.
It has brain training games in there to help improve memory and visual spatial awareness and concentration. It has a blog built into it as well, so people get educated on brain health and strategies, tools, and resources. And it's a communication linking tool for the brain injured person, or what I like to call the retinker. If they're using Retink, they're now retinkers.
Right.
And they're support people. So if they've got an appointment that they need to go to, they can actually invite their support person, whether that be a family member, carer, support worker, into that appointment so they can both see it in their calendar.
Oh, wow. That's really cool because, like you were saying, I would think most brain injuries impact memory on some level.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I would think it would also fit in the dementia world also.
Yes, for sure.
And it sounds like there's like that came to you because of experiences you had,
Mm.
and it was because you failed or you missed appointments or you did this or that. And then it's like, gosh, it sounds like you took that, gosh, I really wish I had something that helped with this, and said, okay, I'm sure you had needed to enlist help and assistance in creating it.
Oh, yes.
It so that other people might not have to have such, I don't know, that a bumpy ride.
Such a struggle. Yeah.
Because it's
That's my
already
goal.
hard.
My goal is to help anyone reach their highest potential after injury.
Mm-hmm.
That really is the driver of all of this. I would love for people not to take 33 years to figure out some of the things that I did.
Right. So that if you can pass along those tools now,
Mm.
then everyone's better off.
Yeah, yeah. And everyone deserves to reach their highest potential, no matter what the potential is.
Right. Now, you said you work in occupational therapy, right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
The occupational, work, the work area. So the occupational industry here in Australia, basically we have a few insurance systems that can cover if you have a work injury.
Okay.
And so whether someone, is a bus driver or they've been to the front line in Afghanistan, whether it be psychological or physical, I assist those people. My specialty is when they can't go back to the job they used to do because of their injury barriers. I help them with vocational counselling and help them to find another pathway that is more suitable.
Now, what happens, I mean, I'm just interested in what happens over there is if, let's say both their hands are useless, or there's that lack of capacity there. Obviously, so much takes our hands. What kind of thing do you do then? Or how do you help them then?
Yeah, so look, there's amazing assistive technology available now. So there's always those sorts of interventions that we can look at doing. So we have an allied health team where I actually work, as far as I do contracting for rehabilitation counselling. But I work with a team of allied health professionals. So we have physios, we have occupational therapists, we have psychologists, rehabilitation counsellors, employment consultants, and we work as a team together. So we each take on our own specialised area. So if a client needs new employment services because they can't go back to their old job, then they're more likely to be referred to me. Mm-hmm. If someone has a physical injury and they've got to go back to the same job, but there might be some workplace adaptations that need to happen, it's more likely to go to an occupational therapist. Yeah, so that's how we work.
What have you noticed as far as there's a huge emotional side of becoming disabled or losing capacity? And
yes,
you woke up to it, if you will.
Yes, literally.
And it happens in 2 seconds. 1 minute, one moment, everything's normal, and the next moment it's not. And it takes so much. It seems to me it would take so much longer to process that on an emotional level, to be able to get to the point of being okay with those new limitations and even finding value in those limitations. It seems to me like you found value in your limitations. How does someone else do that?
Yeah, look, it does. It took a long time. Look, I think hindsight is a valuable thing. And, what I can offer in that space now is that reaching out to those support networks doesn't mean you've failed. Right. When after my accident, there was a brain injury support group that Mum would go to, but I refused because I didn't want to be like that. And I didn't want to acknowledge that I was like that. I spent a number of years in denial and trying to fight the reality of my altered reality.
Yeah.
That probably delayed some of my rehabilitation because, if I'd gone to those brain injury support groups, I would have learnt from other people about what's working for them. I wouldn't have had to figure out so much on my own. So I would say embrace everything that is available in the rehabilitation space. Also, it's not about going to appointments and relying on the health professional to do the exercises with you. You've got to do it at home too. The more you put into your own rehab, the more that you're going to see progress.
Isn't that the truth?
You've really got to be motivated and focused on your goals. Goals are so important. Having, where do I want to be? All this rehabilitation is happening, but having a goal to reach for will keep you motivated and on track. It's really important.
So what do you tell someone if somebody comes in and they're in occupational therapy and they don't they can't see forward,
Mm-hmm.
and they're barely making it there. What do you tell them?
Look, I work from a strengths perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So, I might do a transferable skills analysis with them and look at all the skills that they currently have and how they may be transferable to other areas. That's one thing I might do, to actually
Mm-hmm.
start pulling out the strengths and having a positive conversation, not just a conversation about the barriers and limitations and so forth, but looking from that strengths perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I might also look at their hobbies and interests. What can we start there? Is there something that they want to learn? Is there, a hobby? Do they want to learn knitting? Do they want to... We can turn that into a career sometimes, or a job at the very least.
I like that perspective. Okay, so I've been asking because, of course, I have a disability. Got those questions. I'm not going to deny it. So I have complex regional pain syndrome in both hands.
Okay.
The left one is locked in this shape. It's not going anywhere. And the right one is very limited range of motion. And so I've basically got use of my finger and my thumb. In the States, they say one thing that you don't get is a person to help, right? So if you go to a job, they'll give you what they call accommodations, but those accommodations don't include another person. So, for instance, to do the podcast, I can do the interviews and talk and everything. And then I've got a daughter who's doing the editing. And believe it or not, the caregivers enjoy it too sometimes, and they want to do it too.
Yeah.
Which is super helpful because I just can't I can't physically do the task. I can talk to people and I enjoy it. Now, I also heard you talking about the memory issue, and that's also a problem because I have significant chronic pain. So even, I can't take notes during our my interviews, right?
Yep.
So I have to hold it. And sometimes I lose that question and something else pops up and I just have to let it go. If I hold too hard, then I miss the conversation. But so what is it like over there? I mean, let's say you had somebody come in and I have it in my legs a little bit too. Somebody comes in my situation, and you said you're in Australia, right? So what do you guys do with that person?
Okay. Look, let me give you an example of a lady that I used to do personal care work for in my last year of university. She had severe cerebral palsy as a result of a blood clot when she was born. She couldn't move. Well, she didn't have control over any part of her body really, except her head, and to some degree she could navigate with her feet on the wheelchair. If she needed to sort of move the wheelchair over on tiles, for example, where it was easy to move, she might be able to do that, but it would depend on the day. She worked full time. She relied on a roster of staff like me to do everything that we would do for ourselves: clean our ears, brush our teeth, make dinner, clean the house, dress ourselves, get her out of bed, literally everything she relied on a roster of staff to do. But with the amazing technology that we have, she was able to operate a computer. So she had a headpiece with this, what do you call it? Aphasia is a problem too. Like a stick that came out the top of her head. It was a plastic wand type thing. And her computer was adapted so that she could use it with this wand. And she would use her head and, with the keyboard. And she was a disability researcher.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah.
It sounds like she ended up having to create her own company, if you will, because I don't see going to a job. I'm going to say that. Yeah.
No, she was a government worker. She worked for the government.
She was.
Yeah, she was an employee.
And so they provided all of that assistance for her.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
Well, I'm not sure that they provided everything. I'm not sure if yeah, like I think the adapted technology, yes, that like the computer, and at home she had one as well that she could use. So that would have been at her cost. But she did set up a company that employed me and other staff that were her support workers. Her and another couple of people with a disability set up this company to provide 24/7 around the clock care for people with disabilities. And yeah, so she was amazing. Yeah, she's passed now, but
she sounds amazing. I'm just intrigued as to how it worked.
Yeah.
And I know it's a little off topic. Sorry about that.
That's all right. No, it's all about, overcoming barriers. That's so much of what I do in my work, and I've had to do it for myself, literally. And when I was ever presented with a challenge, or it's not I can't, it's how.
Yeah, I think that's been the frustrating thing for me is they'll give you what I've been told is assistive technology per se, but having a helper on the property waiting to help me or to help do the computer work or anything is just not an option out here. So
yeah. But look at you. You're still, that hasn't stopped you. Look at you. You're still doing podcasts and you've figured out how to do that. And
only recently.
Doesn't matter. You did it.
But I did it. Yeah. Yeah. So, so in that, I think because I've got frustrated, I'm like, why do I keep waiting for them to figure it out? Why? It doesn't make it, it's like how instead it became, okay, what needs to happen. And maybe part of it was that the kids were old enough to want it to help and that they were interested. And the other one is I realized that the caregivers that I have are willing to assist in my disability, which gets into all kinds of other problems in the United States with laws and the guideline. Basically, they're not supposed to help with my disability as far as caregivers go. So that's super disappointing and hurtful. But luckily, I've had there's only one company that I had that was not helpful. And I got rid of them because they told me I couldn't have the kids in the car. I said, well, what if I want to get that cobweb? Well, we can't help with your disability and you need a housekeeper if you want somebody to get a cobweb. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me? And then I'm like, okay, there's big problems here that need to be fixed.
Yeah, that sounds like there's a disconnect for sure.
Yeah, there really is. And so I actually learned a lot of that. And then I thought what needs to happen is we need to bring people together to realize that we're all similar and we're all struggling. All of us. Every single one of us. And then, I was praying and meditating and the podcast plan came about and I was reading, I think it was Originals by Adam Grant. And in it, they were talking about like the women's suffrage movement in the United States and how at first they went around yelling justice, 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 and no one wanted to hear them. And they had to tag on to prohibition or something like that, I want to say. And at that point in time, I thought, you know what? If I go around yelling justice, 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 I think that the book is right. I don't think they're going to hear me. They're going to want to put on their boxing gloves and say, I'm right and you're wrong. And so the best way to go about it was to bring people together and to make a point without blatantly making a point.
Yeah.
To show it and to question it and to investigate it. Because with your traumatic brain injury, and in fact, you said you had a limp, but you said you had some physical disabilities?
Yeah, look, I still have partial paralysis in areas of my bodies which I don't consciously recognize. But it's when I do things like, when I fall over, I always fall over to the left. My left side's weaker than my right side. I had eyeliner tattooed on at one stage, and this is about 15 years ago, and I could hardly feel the left side, but could feel every pinprick on the right side.
Oh, wow.
when I'm really tired, I may be now, I smile crooked because I've got some residual paralysis in the left side of my face. My pain tolerance is incredibly high in some areas, which can be dangerous. And I go through some of that in the book, that, you know, how I've ended up in hospital in emergency because I couldn't feel pain. Well, one of the reasons was I couldn't feel pain, and it nearly killed me.
Wow.
Again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, there are some long-term impacts of not just the sort of short-term memory, fatigue, concentration, those sorts of things that are a struggle every day, but there's ways around it and ways to manage it, and that's what I do.
I think for me, because mine's chronic pain at the end, and of course the limitation and range of motion and all that good stuff is pacing is so important.
Yes.
And not getting mad at myself about it. Just being like, well, today's a nap day.
Yeah, and that's a part of acceptance, you know, and it takes quite a while to move through those, because when you get a disability, you go through a grief process as well for those things that you weren't able to do or you're not able to do any longer. And that altered reality, as I keep saying, you know, it's there is a grief process around that, and getting to that acceptance stage where you can now sort of go, well, you know, this is the way it is today, and that's okay. So I'm going to listen to my body. That's huge, because you know, if you weren't at that stage, you'd be fighting it and potentially doing yourself more harm than good.
Yeah, quality of life really sucked when I didn't do more miserable often than not. And you know, I forget where my question was leading, so I'm just going to move on to the next one.
It doesn't matter, because we're having a great conversation anyway.
But so now you're also caring for your mom who has cancer?
That's right, yeah. So Mum was diagnosed with terminal cancer about 3.5 years ago. I didn't have any choice in these stubborn genes, Angela. I got them both from both sides, from both parents, very, very stubborn. So she was pretty much advised to tidy her up her affairs 3.5 years ago. And she's still probably fitter than most 72-year-olds, 71-year-olds.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, she is. The treatment hasn't worked to get her into any sort of remission. So she's in a clinical trial now. And, you know, we're hoping that will give us some life extension. But, yeah, she's going through some challenges now.
Oh, that's hard. Yeah, that's just hard. And
yeah,
she's lucky to have you.
We've moved in together, so, you know, I can help out. And, yeah.
Now, how is that with it's not really a role reversal, but I know sometimes that happens. I mean, as far as you're taking care of her, not that there's a parental role reversal. Do you see?
No, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it is. The tables are kind of turning in that it's my turn to sort of take care of her now. And as her disease progresses, you know, more so. But look, she's still amazing. She's amazing. She's so resilient, and look, she's been a great role model for resilience for me. She's, you know, had a lot of challenges in her life herself, which, you know, I saw her overcome as a child. She taught me an incredible work ethic, which is why I had my first part-time job at 12 years old. And so, yeah, we're lucky to have each other, and we've got a nice house where, you know, she's basically got downstairs and I've got upstairs. So we have our own space, but can still be there for each other. So it's ideal.
Now, earlier you had talked about how, I mean, some of the things you said, like when they wanted to take you off of the ventilator, and it's like, well, you don't know my daughter, those statements. And were those normal statements or things that you got to hear that your mom believed in you to that extent as you grew up? Or was that more noticeable, or from what you remember, like later after the injury, saying, absolutely not, I believe in her? Or it seems like you just knew she believed in you, but I want to know how you knew that.
Well, look, Mum and I have a fairly special and unique relationship because my father died when I was 3 years old, and she was left in a foreign country, basically, with no access to single mother's benefits or anything like that. So she had to work 2 or 3 jobs to bring me up. So it's pretty much been just her and I all along. So we're really close.
Mm-hmm.
And when the doctors said, these negative prognosis suggested turning life support off, she was like, no, you don't know my daughter. She's strong, she's stubborn, and I don't accept that. So she refused to sign any organ donation forms or have any part of that conversation.
And
Yeah.
do you think hearing those stories and her telling you of how those things went, do you think that helped you in your recovery in some ways?
Oh, look, I didn't really learn about that for some years after.
Mm-hmm.
And through writing the book, it's given me a deeper appreciation of what Mum went through, because we had those conversations to go into more depth about her experience going through all that as a mother, as a carer. And yeah, it was really, it was quite traumatic for her to go back through all of that. But I guess for me, it was cathartic. And, as I said, I now have a deeper appreciation of just how hard Mum fought for me during that, critical time, and afterwards I had rehabilitation. I mean, because the accident was in New Zealand, they have a different insurance system over there called accident compensation, where it doesn't matter if you're injured in a car accident, a work accident, or just a haphazard accident, it's all covered by the same system. And it's automatic. It's a no-fault system.
Okay.
So I had rehab right from the bat. I didn't have to wait to sue anybody or any rubbish like that. I had occupational therapy, physiotherapy, hydrotherapy, psychology, speech therapy. It was really amazing. Some of the more alternative things she had to fight for, like massage therapy, for example. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were also spiritual healers. I'm not joking. She tried everything.
Wow. How much, I was just thinking, I received my sister is a massage therapist, and she sent me a note that massage therapists are considered alternative medical practitioners now in California. So the Department of Public Health has now decided, which I think is great, because although I can't tolerate touch, she does work with a lot of people who have chronic pain, and from my perspective, with COVID especially, was, why would you take away the chronic pain patient's ability to relieve pain? Because if you take that massage therapy away, there's a higher likelihood they're going to end up in the ER because they're miserable, and we're trying to keep them out of the ER. So this made no sense to me. And so I was trying to give her those arguments, and I think she wrote letters and stuff. But
okay.
Yeah, I'm one of those. I think humans are amazing. And yes, people drive me nuts sometimes, but I really think that that everyone gets to have this complex experience of being a human. So,
yes.
And to not, we all suffer anyway. So if we can alleviate that suffering, like your app is going to help people to not suffer as much, hopefully. So good news for California. Now massage therapists are alternative medical practitioners. So
yeah, okay. Well, that's good. That's great.
It's amazing. Like the things that COVID has brought about, right?
Yeah.
My perspective is now a lot of people know what it's like to become disabled, if you will, because they've been quarantined to their home. They're stuck. I mean, I don't know, in Australia, like I was telling you about the caregivers. So for instance, the Medicare guidelines say that, they can take me to the doctor, they can take me to the grocery store, and I can go to religious services for a short period of time. There's nothing in there that says mental health. There's nothing in there that says anything. like that. And so you kind of have to fight for it and say, wait, hold on, I'm human. But then we don't see the disabled people out and about in the community. And then you wonder why, when they are out, people look, they look because they haven't seen it, because now it's new.
Yeah. But even the COVID sort of situation, like I know here in Australia, it brought about some really significant changes that weren't designed for people with disability, but actually were a huge advantage to people with disability. For example, the Westfields shopping centres, which are a whole brand of their own, they put together something where people could shop online at a Westfield shopping centre from any store. And some Westfield shopping centres, there'd be 100 stores at least. And so you can do your shopping online at any of the stores in a Westfield shopping centre and pay for it online, and then drive in to the car park and someone loads it into the car park for you.
Oh, that's awesome.
I mean, how amazing is that?
Yeah, because it's so hard when you can't walk far to go there and get it. Like my kids, every once in a while, if they go shopping, sometimes it's either we have a little trifold fishing chair, if you will. We'll take that, or if I think it might be a long time, because my oldest loves to just meander around, we'll take the wheelchair and I'll walk. And I used to be embarrassed when people would see me walking with the wheelchair following me. And I decided, chances are they're probably cheering me on, and if not, that's their problem. But the story that works for me is they're cheering me on.
Fair enough.
But, I mean, I don't know if you had to do that also with kind of the story you told yourself when you were healing from everything that happened.
Yeah, look, it was just so much of that holding on to that. There was hope that something else was possible. And just through those small steps, my first foray back into sort of any sort of employment was a couple of hours of work in a library, just stacking bookshelves, which was great for my concentration. I can't say that I enjoyed the work, but it was something, it was a start. And then the next job was filing in an office, a medical office, actually my massage therapist's office.
Oh, wow.
And so I'd go in after school a couple of days a week just for a couple of hours and do all their filing. And that was another progression, because it involved a social environment where you could talk to people. And, for any sort of injury, those small steps of success are the building blocks for more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so important. And not being punished in a way because of it. Like for me, I couldn't understand. I knew I couldn't use my hands. I didn't understand why my mind wasn't valued, because I could train. I could have sat and trained people. I could have managed people. There was so much I could have done, but instead it was, well, I'm sorry, you can't go back to work, so we're letting you go. And the emotional devastation that that trauma, right, was so devastating, because now I felt like I had no value and couldn't, I'm injured, I'm in pain all the time. Now on top of it, I have no value. I'm a single mom of 2 young girls. I think they were 6 and 8. And so I spent months crying, and then the only way I was able to make it through was to clearly say, I'm going to be the best mom I can be. And that's how I identified myself. So back in October, when the one company said, well, you can't take your kids to school, you can't take them to, I couldn't provide for their basic needs. Then I became angry, and I was like, hold on, something's wrong. And just, and in the United States, basically you become sequestered as a hostage in your own home if you're following those national guidelines. And I don't think that's appropriate. For the simple reason that I'm injured, I'm on house arrest.
Yeah.
That's not right.
What sort of work did you do before all this, Angela?
So I did a lot, but I was in the medical field when it happened. Before that, I'd been a mortgage broker. I also worked in commercial property management, truck body manufacturing, banking. I was the president of a local chamber, started, a village enhancement committee. So I was a pretty active person.
Yeah. And, with all those different skills, many of them relating to customer service, and you could be a trainer of customer service. And
that's what I thought. That's why I didn't understand. So I'm fascinated to hear that what is happening in Australia is much different than what is happening here. And that it seems like in the environment you're in, you're looking for where is another value that we can use? Where is something? They've got to have something. Let's find it and let's teach them how to use it.
Yeah. And look, there are different systems. There are insurance systems. We have NDIS insurance system, which is only a few years old here in Australia, and it's specifically for disability issues.
Okay.
So it's a funding body that helps with support at home and all those other branches of that, support workers that come in, or interventions that may be needed to help cross some of those injury barriers. And it's fantastic. We here in Australia, they don't call us the lucky country for no reason.
Right.
And I do, on the brain injury websites on Facebook, the groups and so forth, I so often read how people are trapped in a situation because of insurance and lack of insurance and things, and people are basically hamstrung because of it, and that's not fair.
It's not. And I think it comes down to that basic human right. Although there's an injury there, doesn't mean I have no value. So how do we find that value, and how do we use that value to better the world?
Yeah, because you don't want those legislative frameworks, that enable the modifications, workplace modifications and so forth, to just be lip service. There has to be a substantial underlying action to them.
Yeah. And because, like I was saying about the caregiving companies, I've had caregiving companies for almost 10 years. And of that, I only had the one that ever came in and said, oh, no, you absolutely cannot do that. And when they did that, I knew it was wrong, but then I realized they were using those guidelines. They were using the guidelines for maximum. So instead of looking at it as a minimum, they're looking at it as, this is all we will do.
The reality could have been that person was scared of heights and didn't want to get on a ladder, and so they're going to use the legislation.
Yeah, no, it was the regional people that came in, and then multiple caregivers with that particular company.
Oh, right. So they were all
they
programmed.
Just didn't. Yeah, they only wanted to. So basically, from my perspective, I was treated like a dog, if you will, or a thing. I'm going to feed you, bathe you, do the bare minimum, and that's it. And that certainly didn't help with self-esteem or anything. But ultimately, humanely, I knew it was wrong.
Yeah. And you had enough challenges without, an unnecessary challenge like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I couldn't imagine what about the other people with this company? And then I learned about the kids. I learned about that there's laws that help disabled parents in the States, and there are laws in California, and there are laws that help disabled children. There's nothing there to protect the child of a disabled parent, though. So I can get support. I can't get anything for my normal child because she's not disabled. So then that neglect thing I was talking about earlier, that neglect thing comes in, then I get in trouble for neglect because I can't fulfill my basic duties when there's someone literally sitting here that's capable of helping me do that task.
That's crazy.
It just made no sense to me. So that's where a lot of this came from. That's how this all got started. So part of it is legislative. And so while I've got a group of us working on that, all volunteers, right? Right now, because that's how it is. And then the podcast to bring everyone together to recognize that having a disability doesn't change that I'm human.
Mm.
It doesn't change that I struggle. That even if you look capable, doesn't mean you don't also have similar struggles.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, mine just look different. And mine's just a little more visible.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, it's so much the case with mental health as well. You know, you don't see often. It's not obvious mental health issues that people live with and struggle with, but it doesn't mean that they're not there.
Right. And that's really hard, even for me. I don't know about you, but, you know, I find myself out in the community sometimes, and sometimes I forget that other people are just having bad days or bad moments.
Yeah.
And I make this snap judgment and I decide it's true. I mean, we all do it, right?
Oh, look, we're human. We're human and we're judgmental.
Yeah. So how do we get people to remember to not do that?
Well, look, I think the only thing we are actually capable of controlling is ourselves. We have no control of what other people do, think, their actions,
true,
etc. And I think the sooner that we realize that it's you know, how we react to a situation is our choice. We can be a victim in our lives, or we can be a pilot in our lives. Pilot chooses the destination, they set the course, they know the steps, or they plan the steps to get to the destination.
Right.
You know, we can use so much of our experiences to be an excuse not to try, or as a reason, as fuel to try. And you know, I think that when we really embrace that within ourselves, and, you know, you're doing things like meditation, and, you know, and that's great for the brain and great for mental health, and great for creativity, because the podcast came about through meditation.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, you made a choice to actually do something positive for yourself in that space. And I think the more people that can do that, can look at those enablers and those tools and resources that can enable us to take that next step in progress, we'd all be better off for it.
Yeah. So 3 things you would want to let the audience know that can help them with that hope and that dream. Okay,
well, that's why I wrote Holding On to Hope, Finding the New You After a Traumatic Brain Injury. So that, you know, it is based on my own story, but it's also written with my allied health hat on. So there's lots of tools, resources, tips and tricks to manage not only for the injured person, but for their family, caregivers, health professionals. There's 17 reviews on Amazon from a cross-section of that community, people with brain injury, carers and health professionals, and they gave it 5 stars, all
nice.
of them. Also, the memory management app that I have coming out, I think that is going to be a game changer for so many people. I've been utilizing it myself for the last month, just trialing it, and you know, so we can pick up the bugs and things in it before we launch it. And it's amazing. It really is. And so, just go to my website, www.holdingontohope.com.au, and you'll find information about everything that I'm offering. I've got mindset and memory boosting workshops coming up in the next week. That's a series of 3 workshops that basically people can work through. You watch one workshop at a time. First one's on mindset, the second one's on brain health goal setting, the third one's on memory management strategies. And I just want to help people reach their highest potential. That's the whole goal.
So stay stubborn and stay curious.
Absolutely.
Is that what I'm hearing? I love it.
And inspiration equal enabling.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Angela. Congratulations on getting this all off the ground.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Relatively Damaged by Damaged Parents. We really enjoyed talking to Nicole about how she recovered from traumatic brain injury and how she copes with the residual damage. We especially liked when she gave us hope. Check out her book, Holding On to Hope. To unite with other damaged people, connect with us on TikTok. Look for Damaged Parents. This podcast was sponsored in part by Arches Audio. We'll be here next week, still relatively damaged. See you then.